Hello, I'm Akihiko Miyoshi, and I teach studio art in the art department. So I teach photography classes. I teach a class on the internet and art, digital video. What else do I teach? Maybe I teach some class called new media, old media. So media related classes. And I have other colleagues in the studio department that teach painting and sculpture. We're a 3-person department or 3-person program in the studio art. We a lot of times we have a 4th person because we need a lot of classes. And Kris here is in the art history side. And one thing that I would sort of immediately say that's unique about our art department is that we're a combined studio art and art history program. In a lot of places, those two are different or they exist in different sort of places in the curriculum. But here, it's a single department. And what that means is that students who go through the art program, they take both. In the studio art, we have different 100 level classes. Like for example, I teach a 100 entry level classes in photography. My colleague Michael might teach a intro level painting class, and Jerry, she might teach a intro class on installation art or maybe sculpture. So these are all 100 level classes that are available for everyone. So starting from freshmen, we actually have reserved seats. So you could start taking them, and eventually you could take 200 level, 300 level, or more advanced art classes.
So I'm Kris Cohen. I teach contemporary art, but I also teach media studies here. So I'll talk about the film media studies department later. My training is in both, and my courses tend to sort of cross over both those boundaries pretty fluidly. Part of that is because I work in 20th century and late 20th century art, and a lot of that art had to do with technology, but also part of it is just an interest in sort of ordinary technologies outside of the art world as well. But in the art history department, so the 201 art introduction to art history is really the only required, is the gateway course for every other art history course, basically. And from there, the courses are sort of specialized according to each individual faculty member's interests. So we have me, and I focus on 19th, 20th, 21st century, mostly American art history and technology media. We have Dana Katz, who focuses on Renaissance art, Italy and Spain. We have someone here next year who works on the sort of visitor working on Renaissance in a global perspective. So really thinking about trade routes between Europe and Asia in the Renaissance period, Renaissance and Baroque. And then Michelle Wang, who focuses on ancient Chinese art history. So the courses beyond the introductory art history courses really specialize in the fields of the individual faculty who are teaching. And we range outside of our fields sometimes, but mainly the courses, sort of the specialized courses, stick to close to what we each work on, what we know best and what we tend to write about. If you're in the art department, you like any department at Reed, you declare your major at the end of your 2nd year. And then you sort of declare if you declare art, you declare which track you want to be in, art history or studio, at the end of your junior year, basically 3rd year. And then you take there's sort of a qualifying exam that you take. And there's a different one for studio and one for art history. The studio one is basically 10 days of really intensive studio practice and sort of an oral conversation about the work you did at the end of that. And the art history side is one long research paper done in the course of one semester in one particular class called junior seminar. So like Aki said, the experience of studio people and art history people is kind of minimally differentiated. And in fact, we get a lot of people who haven't really decided until the very last second which they want to do. And some people who switch at the last second from one to the other, who thought they were going to be studio and end up being art history. So it's good in a lot of studio art programs. The art history and really just history generally can end up feeling a bit distant and a bit like a sideline that feels optional to a lot of students. And I think it's important here that those things are more integrated. It also means that their courses throughout the art department are populated by people from a bunch of majors. Our courses are really popular for majors all over the college, partially because we set aside seats in our introductory level course, Art 201. And then it makes sense to pair that with an upper level art history to take care of sort of an elective or a breadth requirement if you're in a, say, biology or a different department. But also it means studio people and art history people are always mixed in the same classes, and that really helps the conversations, I think. It's a department that has some funding. We have an endowment from a pair of people, the Cooley Grays, that lets us do some things that are really important. One is we can fund we have a little bit of money to fund student internships over the summers, which is to say help you if the internships in the art world, like many worlds, are basically not paid. So we can help you pay for housing and food if you get an opportunity to have an unpaid internship. We have a speaker fund that lets us bring, for such a small school, it lets us bring kind of improbably famous artists and art historians to read as speakers every year. And we also have funding sometimes for particular classes to take trips. So it is occasionally happens that a course, say on, let's say land art in the American Southwest, we haven't done this, but could take an entire class of students to the American Southwest and travel around on a bus and see sites of land, important land art. We've taken classes to China. We've taken classes to Italy. Italy, is that true?
Yeah, Italy, Florence, no?
California. So, and then we also have money when you're a senior and you're working on if you're a studio major, some money to support studio materials in courses, but also in your senior year when you're doing your thesis.
Yeah. Can I then jump in and just mention that? So your senior thesis in studio art, Kris could talk about the senior thesis for art history, but in both cases, it's a year-long process. So that's substantial. And in addition to that, we have the written component. So that's, I think, a little bit unusual for an undergraduate program. A lot of graduate programs ask you to write as well as to have a sort of a thesis show. But it turns out, I think it's really good. So it is a very difficult task. That is, you have to write about your work while you make work. So that's very difficult. But what I found is that once you finish, you have a body of work that you made. It's not part of an assignment that you had to do. So it's something that you could own, and then you have a way to talk about it because you wrote about it, thought about it, and wrote about it for a year. So that is our thesis, studio art thesis. And of course we have, once you graduate, we have students who turned out to be artists or who work, students who work in the museum world. Of course, that's sort of one direction, but we have a lot of students who work outside of art. For example, like a lot of my students, they have digital skills. So I have students working in web design or advertising. So our students go into very diverse areas. And maybe Kris, you could talk about the art history thesis and
If you're in art history, you do a year-long research project on a topic of your choosing. And one of the things you can do in our department, like in any department, is you can do what's called an interdisciplinary thesis, which essentially means you're working on your thesis between two departments. The art department will be one, and say biology has been a popular one in the last few years. And the result ends up being a body of work you've done, advised both by a biology professor and by an art professor, art history or studio, depending on what your practice is. The art department doesn't consciously train people for particular kinds of jobs. Like it's not training people to be animators in the studio, like in the Hollywood studio animation or in a big Hollywood studio. You can leave with those skills that would get you that job if you say use your senior thesis years to acquire them. And that's what a lot of people do. When people want really particular skills that aren't taught by any of our different faculty, they usually use their senior thesis as a way to do that, or they can use their thesis as a way to do that. Talking about the art department and studio art and art history is talking about majors. You can major in the art department and then specialize in art history or studio. The film and media studies is a program, not a department, and it's a minor, not a major. what that really means, there's a whole bunch of bureaucratic stuff that means. It's boring. But what it really means for you is that there's not a dedicated body of faculty who are in a film and media studies department. It means that there are faculty from a number of different departments who sometimes teach courses that are substantially about the history of film and media, or the practice of, or in the case of Aki's classes, the practice of sort of making media or technology-based art. And those courses are in a sense sort of cross-listed in both the home department and film media studies. So for instance, my classes are always in art, but next year I'm offering the Introduction to Media Studies class, and that will count toward the film media studies minor. It sort of in practical terms means there's not as many courses offered each semester as in a full-time 3-person department. And the requirements are consequently lower. So to get a film and media studies minor, you have to take both the Introduction to Film Theory, the Introduction to Media Studies, those 2 intro courses, and then 3 more units beyond those first 2 in the 4-year, or however many years you're there. 4 more?
Intro to Film and Intro to Media Studies. And in addition to that, 4 more units of electives, and 2 units must be at the 300 level or higher, it says.
Sorry, it's a new minor, as you can tell. So we have people in the German department, people in the Spanish department, people in the French department, people in English literature department who teach courses in film, really film theory and film history. And then there's someone in German, Jake Fraser, and then me and Aki, who really teach courses in media studies, so media and technology more broadly. One of the ways that Reed sort of works to build relationships and community outside of Reed College is by bringing in visiting artists. We tend to bring in, 2 to 5 visiting artists every year who come to visit particular courses and then often give a public lecture. I guess everyone in studio and then me in art history has pretty active connections with various art organizations and studios and museums in Portland. So a lot of our students get internships at local museums, local galleries, end up sort of interning with a particular artist over the summer. Sometimes, obviously, the students forge those relationships themselves, but often we help introduce when we can. That's some about the external. Aki, you want to?
Yeah, and one thing we should have mentioned much earlier is the Cooley Gallery. So we have a gallery, a college gallery. The gallery brings in artists, very interesting artists that might fit into some of our classes, but it's also, it may be having conversations with other classes outside of the art department, like English or history. So they'll have shows. I think a lot of students that are interested in the arts, they intern for the Cooley Gallery too. So that's another opportunity that you guys will have.
So the Cooley policy has always been they do not show work by faculty at this school. And I only say that because it means that they're always showing work from people who are, in a way, kind of additions to what students can get here. And the Cooley Gallery is very, very, more than probably anywhere else in the art department, is really connected to various places in the art world, in Portland, in Oregon, intensely, and really New York and kind of all over the world. So a lot of times we get traveling exhibitions that were in places like the Whitney, or like big museums will kind of have a show that stops here.
As someone that was trained in an art school model, I think what's unique about Reed is you get to interact with people that are doing and thinking about different things. Like I would have math majors together with poli-sci majors in an art class. And that conversation, I think, is very productive. And that doesn't happen in an art school, not necessarily. Right. That is, there's a certain kind of, everybody has a serious commitment to some intellectual activity. And in our classes, that shows. Even in an art class, we'll be, talking about a certain kind of, problem in biology or something because there's a biology major. So I think that's one thing that is very unique and interesting.